Hi gardeners, we are at the end of April 2024. If I learned anything from last year gardening in our hot desert climate here near Phoenix, Arizona, it was that I need to shade my plants earlier in preparation for summer. Acquired a lot of subtropicals, mainly mango seedlings, as well as avocados last year, and had them in containers on the side of the house. And even in morning light, those container plants really suffered last summer, just given the extreme temperatures, where we didn't cool down at night. Even in-ground plants really burnt up. It wasn't until August that I started hanging shade cloth, and at that point it was a little too late. The damage was already done. So, not going to make that mistake again this year. I've actually already hung shade cloth. While we're not in triple digits yet, we will be there soon. And given how much UV exposure these plants get, it certainly is not going to impede their growth here in spring to give them some shade relief even now where we're hitting into the 90s. So I'll show you which plants in my yard are actually already covered with shade cloth and why I'm doing that. This is the first structure that I want to show you. This is for my 2 raised beds. I have 18-inch tall Vigo raised beds. Under the shade cloth, we are quite a bit cooler. The material that I'm using right here is actually 60%, and you can see framing, and this is 3/4 inch EMT conduit, and then these corners I got from a canopy and tarp store, and they're just the flat corner angle roof connectors. So with this structure, I opted to have corners on the bottom and the top, so this frame actually sits on the ground. The box is more sturdy against winds. It's not going to have as much chance to bend up since it's pretty much in a rectangle shape. So this particular rectangle is about 3 feet wide and about 6 feet long. And it's covering up my vegetables. As you can see, I have tomatoes here. And with the extra shade, I'm basically going to get longer fruiting out of this because the pollen's not going to dry out as much with that direct sun, and the fruit's not going to burn and scald. Having shade up is also going to help slow down that evaporation. I do have mulch in these beds to help retain moisture, but again, if that mulch is baking in the sun, it's definitely going to dry out faster than if you've got it under some shade. So not only does it help the plants out, but it also helps conserve water. Under the shade, I do have peppers growing at the back here. Those are just in containers. There's some basil. These are all going to benefit and still grow really well in the shade. We go around to the other side. You can see it's a similar setup. Same density on the shade cloth and around the same size. And I've basically just taken the shade cloth and just pulled it all the way across. And then to make it nice and taut, we're going to use clamps, these PVC pipe clamps on the top. These are an absolute must. I used to use jaw clamps and they just tear the material. These snap clamps fit very snugly around the material, and you can see they're rounded, so the material is not going to tear away. And I spaced them about every 18 inches or so. So this isn't going to go anywhere even in monsoon storms. The setup would be great for any vegetables, but just to show what I've got some onion here, some chiya, parsley, tarragon, and then my eggplants. So if you have vegetables in raised beds, definitely recommend some shade cloth if they get afternoon sun. Even morning sun can really cook the vegetables when we're talking 115, 120 Fahrenheit. Fortunately, I have a really nice natural microclimate here for shade. You can see the Royal Poinciana is leafing out at this point, and in another month or so this is going to be very densely shaded with the Royal Poinciana. Having citrus all in this area and guava as well as bamboo provides natural shade. This avocado plant does pretty well in this location. It's getting morning light right now. This is my bacon avocado. But the bamboo here blocks the afternoon sun. And I am establishing some shade here. This ice cream bean was planted last year. Still has a ways to go, but that will provide a nice shade canopy to give that dappled light situation in here. So I did remove the Shangri-La mulberry this past winter. They used to provide a lot of shade in this area in favor of growing other plants. I'm just growing mulberry dwarf varieties in the container at this point. So I need to reestablish this area. So when you don't have a natural microclimate like I just showed you, good idea to stand up shade again. Even if it's temporary, I might have to use this for a year or two until the canopy in here grows in. But for now, it's going to give these plants the relief they need. So again, this structure that's up here, same kind of deal where I'm using a 60% shade density. It's built out of 3/4 inch conduit. You can see it's just a big square here. This is 10 by 10. Again, I've got the corners, flat roof corner connectors, and then to secure the top, again, those PVC clamps. To ensure that this canopy structure does not blow over in the wind, I pound in these J rebar stakes. They are a foot long, so I've got at least one on each straight piece of pipe that's on the bottom here. You could even go, one on each corner if you have super windy conditions. So I do have plants going that are going to help in time, like this moringa. This was planted last year. It's cut back right now, which I do every year because these grow so aggressively. This will easily put 10 feet of growth on this year, and it will protect this area from the blasting late afternoon sun from the west. I have a elderberry that can take the sun on the ground, so it's going to be more bushy and help protect the trunk of the trees in here. And most importantly, I have this ice cream bean again establishing here. Still a young plant. This was only put in last year, kind of late last year. It hasn't even had a year in the ground. In 2 years, this thing will be massive and provide all the coverage these plants need. But right now, it's not in that state. So what I mainly need protected in here right now are not the trees I just showed you, but the ones on the interior, the new, smaller plants that are more sun sensitive. So here I've got 2 low chill cherries. We've got the Royal Crimson and then the Mini Royal planted in one hole here. These were just planted this year. They're establishing, and even when they're established, these trees need pretty good sun protection in our climate. If you're growing in a mild climate like San Diego, of course you're going to want to give them as much sun as possible. That's not us here in the desert, where we're dealing with much harsher conditions. This is a privet stopper, a young tropical cherry, have a Suriname cherry, which can handle the full sun here, but will appreciate a little bit of relief, can put on more growth. This Hachia persimmon definitely is going to appreciate the shade as it gets established. This newly planted cherry of the Rio Grande is also going to appreciate some shade. These really do not like to be in full sun here and will burn up. Same thing with this newly planted Grumichama. It's going to want some protection. And we have yet another tropical cherry here. This is the Eugenia Raponda that I put into the ground this year. I'm establishing another ice cream bean here for shade. So my goal eventually is to have 90% shade canopy in my yard. It's again going to keep that mulch on the ground that's protecting the soil and keeping the moisture in the soil. It's going to prevent that from drying out as much because it's not going to be baking in the sun. It's going to be in dappled light. So I'm going to be conserving water in that regard. If you're like me and growing subtropicals, they are used to a very different climate, one that's humid. And we do not have the humidity when it comes to our warm growing season. While we do get some monsoonal moisture, it's generally very short-lived, and there have been years where it's been completely dry in the West Valley on my side of town, and we haven't gotten that. But by having the shade, it's again going to help increase that moisture. Beyond raising humidity, it's also going to protect these leaves a bit. When a leaf is exposed to the sun, it's going to sweat more. And at least last summer, my plants really struggled keeping up with the transpiration, with the sweating. And when it can't keep up, you will get sun scald. And when the leaves get damaged, then they can't take up nutrition as well. And finally, one of the most important reasons to have shade canopy is to reduce temperatures. We all know that standing in the shade is a lot more pleasant when it's 120 degrees out than standing in full-on sun. So those are the 4 big reasons anyone would want shade in their yard in our climate. Another new structure that I put up, as you'll notice, the Royal Poinciana is gone. I've been really struggling with that tree over time. I did not plant it in an ideal spot, and it's just not done well. Every winter it suffers a large amount of damage. This last summer actually did it in as well. So reset, I cut that tree down. In place of the Royal Poinciana, I've got a Boswellia sacra. This is frankincense, sacred frankincense. It actually does unbelievably well in our climate as long as you support it the first few years, especially in winter, and then it can handle it. Even out in my area where we see mid-20s, this tree will suffer some dieback at the top, but will power through winter pretty well. So I wanted a tree that would do well, that I wouldn't have to worry about in time, and that could get very large. I'll just show you. This is my specimen tree over here that I've had in the yard for 12 years. It's quite large, and it would be probably 4 times that size if it wasn't right up against the wall, like you can see there. Really had to keep it pruned up. Had no idea these trees could get so large. And it does produce really nice shade. The bees absolutely love the flowers, and of course it's a great medicinal. So it seemed like a good one. It's also evergreen, which I want more evergreens in the yard, just for better aesthetics year-round. While this tree does not really require the shade cloth, the 60%, it's not going to harm it either. And the main reason I have it up is actually for the trees around here that relied on the Royal Poinciana for shade in summer. Given that that tree is gone, I needed something, again, temporary to provide the shade that they need until this little guy can grow up. And I found that with frankincense trees, if you do things right, you should have a fairly large tree within 3 to 4 years. So this might be up for a couple more years, but that's what I'm doing as a temporary stopgap until this tree gets to a size where it can shade the nearby plants. Alright, similar to the vegetable bed that I showed you on the other side of my yard, I do have one against this east wall here. This is a concrete bed, out of the sides, open to the bottom. And you can see I've got beets that probably need to come out here and be harvested, but I've got beets as well as tomatoes in here. Reduce the need for water because they're not going to transpire as much through their leaves in this shaded situation. It's going to conserve water. It's not going to dry out as fast, and it's going to protect your crop from burn. Especially those tomatoes can easily get burnt up in direct sun. Structure is made exactly the same way. This is 1-inch EMT conduit. Still have these snap clamps on top, and a 50% shade density overhead. I want to also point out that a shade structure doesn't just have to be for plants. It's actually very beneficial for my pond here. I've had this shade structure up pretty much the life of this pond. It's a 50% shade cloth, helps reduce the algae, it keeps things a little cooler in here. And the added bonus is that in the winter time, it actually helps protect my plumeria from frost damage. I did not do anything with these plumerias. My yard did get down to 26, and they were fine. The final set of shade structures to show you are the ones that I stood up last August. They house the majority of my sensitive plants, majority of which are subtropicals. On logistics, this wall over here is my east wall. So the light that actually comes into the structure happens in the morning, like we are right now, which is good to get more of that lower light situation on these plants. Have the rest of my avocados in here. This is the day. It's chopped back because it got so badly damaged last year. It had black branches, so I did prune it back really hard, and you can see it's fleshing out with new growth. I have mangoes in here, dragon fruits, grumachama, my Jabotacaba collection here, as well as my in-ground Jabotacaba. Have my blueberries in here, Sapodilla, and then you can see just a number of container mango plants. This shade cloth, I believe, is a higher density. This one is 80%, and even that, you can see the mangoes are just exploding with growth. They're definitely getting enough light. These are all young, so I cut the flowers off. They're actually all in bloom. I do not want them to fruit this year. So I cut that off, and now they're able to put on all of their growth. The leaf like this, especially when it's coming out, was exposed to full-on Arizona sun in summer. It would burn up. It would turn black. And even as it matures up like it is now and getting thicker, it would still be very prone to burning. Especially with young mangoes. I found last year for sure a huge benefit once these went under a high density shade cloth. They really started pushing a lot of growth. They weren't struggling, and certainly weren't getting any of that burn. We've had some winds here recently, and you can see just a little bit of wind can cause damage to these leaves. They're so friable at this stage, fragile. So another benefit of having this cloth over is it does help take down the brunt of the wind a little bit off these plants. So I put the shade up in April, and I actually wish I had done it back in March, because we had an unexpected storm come in March, and you can see really damage the leaves, a lot of the older leaves. They were actually perfect coming out of winter because I had this protected under frost cloth. So maybe not too intuitive, but another reason to have some kind of shade cloth up is if you have inclement weather, like you have a freak storm that brings in hail, it's going to protect your plants from damage. Coupled with shade cloth, I do try to put in support plants like Mexican sunflower. Here's another moringa to help with that natural shading. But as you can see, this tree has a bit to go. It really won't spring into growth until we're in the thick of summer. By then, these plants could get burnt up. Reminder on shading plants, not too early to think about doing that, especially if your food forest is young and you don't have that shade canopy grown in, or you're doing something like me and changing things up. Maybe taking out some large established trees and starting over in places. A good thing to do for that temporary shade relief in summer, as well as for your sensitive tropicals that really are going to do their best in that kind of circumstance, where they're not fighting fighting that sun and getting burnt up, giving them the best opportunity to grow during our warm time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and happy gardening.